right, everybody. Who Killed WCW is in the books. The series finale has just finished airing on Vice. Juice was crying. Blake was yawning. Eric Bischoff was telling you one thing and then something else. Corey's here. I'm here. Blake's here. Juice is here. I'm going to throw it over to the hostess with the mostest. That is Corey Saunders, my kicks from my fix. The man who got me into sneakers. Corey, I love you, Blake. Take it away.
Guys, well, it has come to an end. Listen, Juice, you're going to have to take this one because this is going to be the theme.
If he fucking starts crying off the bat, I'm logging out of the show.
That's why I'll save it for the main event. I'll hook you until the end.
For everybody watching, first of all, we appreciate you being here on this late night, but it's going to be a hot show tonight. We are coming to the end of a 4-part series, Who Killed WCW. If you've been watching, I'm sure if you're watching us, you've been watching the show in general. And so what has happened is we know WCW as for a long time throughout the 80s, the 90s, early 2000s as the competition, the other company. There was WWF, there was WCW. And throughout this 4-part series, they chronicle what has gone on in the last couple, actually not even the last couple of years, the beginning of how you get Eric Bischoff, who was pretty much the head of WCW, and his ascension in the company and taking the company along with him up to heights where it is past WWF. It's the #1 wrestling show. And then you see the dive off the cliff, I guess you could say, to where ultimately we're watching a show almost 25 years later about who killed WCW, because WCW is not in existence anymore. And we're here to talk about it. And we saw the show. The show tonight opened up with pretty much kind of recapping what I just talked about. And it talked about how, for the better part of about 2 years, WCW was on top. And then it starts to take a dive and it never recovers. This show really covers how WCW is in 2001 in March, and they're airing the final Nitro, which up until that point, pretty much a lot of the talent didn't think it was the final Nitro. They thought maybe they were going into hiatus, and we're going to get into that because for a while, up until WWF really, Vince came on the beginning of the show on Nitro, people still didn't believe it. Drew, what's going on?
He had WCW in the palm of his hands, right? Yeah. The fate of WCW lays in the palm of my hands. And I love the backstage stuff here that we never saw before. Juice, hurry up. Get your greed shirt in, because is that the last WCW pay-per-view? Hurry up. Go ahead. Get it in.
Yes, it is. There
That's what killed WCW right there. It's called greed. So
perfect timing.
Not the pay-per-view itself, but greed. Yeah, I mean, Corey, this whole thing, Blake and Juice as well. The final episode I thought was the best out of the 4. Obviously, the first and the 4th, I think, are the 2 best, in my opinion. But I like the backstage stuff that we never saw. That was really the highlight for me here of the last Nitro. And it was interesting to see like a lot of people's perspective on how some knew and some pretended like they didn't know, or they didn't know a format and they didn't see Shane McMahon. It was kind of weird. But yeah, I mean, you really hit on it, Corey. I was just doing the palm of my hand stuff.
Yeah, so Blake, I'm going to jump over to you because I'm going to go to Juice. Like, Blake, did you watch that actual episode of WCW Nitro? Yeah. What was your feelings on that?
I was in my dorm room my freshman year of college. Remember thinking and I kind of relived it watching it tonight, thinking how wild it was to see Vince McMahon open up Nitro. And just like, kind of seems cheesy when you're talking about it in this context because it's world of wrestling, but just what a crazy new world it was for wrestling at this point because Vince McMahon owned both WCW and WWE.
I don't think that's cheesy at all, dude. I think honestly, Blake, when you look at this, well, sure, for sure. But what I'm saying is all of us, like none of us at that point really had any inside information or dirt or anything that was easily accessible to us unless you subscribed to a newsletter or you were in the business. So to your statement, it was like absolutely a term that I use a ton now. It was wild. Vince McMahon on Turner. You know, we were kids or not even born when Black Saturday happened.
Yeah.
Right.
So
now you say that about not having access. That was the one thing that stood out to me tonight was being an 18, 19-year-old kid back then. I had no concept of the .com bubble and the financial challenges that AOL actually had after the merger and the role that played in potentially, as I knock something over, potentially, WCW executives wanting to get this thing that's losing money off its books.
Yeah, Blake, it's interesting you bring that up. That's one of the main things that stuck out to me about this episode was that what you just mentioned, you really got to see how in dire straits AOL was and the merger with Time Warner to where it was like, oh my goodness, AOL is the way they were portraying it was that it's on the brink of going out of business itself almost. And this was at a time where the internet was really, really primitive. And I remember how I got the news that day. This was my junior year of high school. I got it at school that day, if I'm not mistaken. Either that or I saw it maybe at home on the internet. And this was the early days of dirt sheets. And I want to say, I can't remember what site it was, but I remember seeing it.
Like fucking Meltzer Baby was the only one around back then.
Yeah, I was going to say somebody put it out. I don't know if it was on the chat boards or something, but I distinctly remember seeing it on the internet. And I was like, oh my goodness, Vince McMahon has really bought WCW. I heard about it over the weekend, but Monday was really when you really heard about it, that it was done. And so, Juice, I'm coming to you now because I know you weren't really cognizant of what was going on back then. Because you were young.
I was
looking back
8 at this time. Yes, 8.
So he was in second grade.
I was third grade. A little bit of cognitive remembering from that time, but go ahead.
Third grade. What are you?
Being able to go back, being able to go back, as I know you have researched and you've gone top to bottom, left to right on this episode in particular. Looking back at it, what are your initial thoughts with how back then, looking back on it, how this was broken to people? Because a lot of people either found out on the internet or they didn't find out until they watched Nitro and they saw Vince McMahon on the screen.
Right. And we discussed this, before the mics went hot. But I stopped watching wrestling even as a 8-year-old. I stopped watching wrestling after this and up until probably 2005 when a show came locally, No Way Out 2005. And I kind of got back into wrestling and I never really stopped. And back then, I do vaguely remember sitting to watch this. I've told people, numerous times, we always would watch Nitro, tape Raw, and I really didn't have internet access until probably 04, 05. So, I mean, I was not aware of any of this stuff as it happened. So it was just as shocking to, some of the, maybe even people that were at the show. I thought that one of the most interesting, to Drew's point, when we saw some of this footage, Dustin Rhodes being like, yeah, this is it. It's over. like there was no, and that is a guy who WCW, then WWF in 91, then he goes back to WCW for a big run, then goes and becomes Goldust. This is another run back in WCW. He has been through the gambit and he plain as day, everybody else is like, what are we going to do? What's happening? He's like, no, this is it. And it was pretty jarring that I don't know how many other people I saw after they showed Dustin that had that same sentiment of like, no, it's over. Booker T mentioned this is an audition, which I felt was pretty unique. And clearly it was. And that's why he's one of the most successful guys that come from WCW. So, I mean, we'll touch on all that, but shocking to say the least. And just wild to relive it again.
Juice, I'm gonna stay with you, and then I'm coming back down the line again. So during this time in the show, you mentioned they showed Dustin Rhodes, and I believe that was Charles Robinson. It's like I got the run sheet in my back pocket, and they pull it out, and they're like, Vince McMahon's the first name on there, saying Vince McMahon vignette or promo or whatnot, and being on there when they were talking about that, they were saying, a lot of the guys were saying, I think it was Booker that said. It didn't feel like or maybe Medusa or Sharma. Somebody was like, it didn't feel like a family anymore. And it felt, I think it was Medusa. I think she was saying it felt like everybody was out for themselves at this point. And they did go to Booker and they said, Booker was like, well, when they took a look at the books, they had no choice but to pull the plug on it. So right. Juice, I want to ask you, did you feel that same way? Because I know as a WCW loyalist, did you feel looking back at that it truly felt that it got to the point that it wasn't a family anymore for them? They were trying to find where their next, not where their next meal was coming from, but where their next job was coming from.
To touch on something that they briefly looked at, which I was stunned that they even got this deep. I know this is a 4-part series, and I don't know how deep they could get each hour, but they just simply referenced how Uncensored 99 and Uncensored 2000 practically
got it in my notes.
Practically had the same match. Now, Uncensored 99. Remember, this is because we talked about the Goldberg finger poke of
doom. What's the reason for that, Juice? What's the reason that match was twice? Because of fucking Hulk Hogan. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I'm going to get to. We talked about how Goldberg loses the title at Starrcade. They do the finger poke of doom the following week, and there was no real creative direction. And what did they do? They went back to what got them so much success. And it was Hogan, Flair, barbed wire steel cage, and Uncensored 99. A lot of shenanigans, but it still sold. I have here 325,000 buys. The following year, remember, this is now after the Halloween Havoc 99 debacle, the early parts of Vince Russo. Now we're back to where he's not there, and it's a hodgepodge. They run the same match back. It is the Yapapai Indian strap match, Uncensored 2000.
Yeah,
that's right. And it got 60,000 buys. And if you watch it back, you know, Uncensored 99, the fans are involved, they're invested, and it's fantastic. And even though it's not what it was something. You watch the 2000 Uncensored match, it's just lackluster. Not that many people care anymore. I think even if it's just a year, the next year is so much different in regards to how the wrestlers felt, how the company felt. And I think a lot of people were out for themselves. Once they figured out, maybe we're not going to be doing this much longer, whether they knew a sale was coming or not. I got to do this. I got to do that. Kevin Nash is sitting at home watching the final Nitro because he'd rather cash a check than stay on the Titanic till it sinks. So, I mean, I don't blame him. Yeah.
81% decrease is what they said from the buy rates from the year prior to the year later. And then literally weeks later, that's when we get the reset, right?
Yeah, in April.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
so
real quick, I want to jump in there with this. Absolutely. I mean, if you look at that, I'm glad you brought those numbers up because, pay-per-views, I want to say were around $30 then. So if you just do some rough math, you're talking about $6 to $7 million difference in revenue the company brought in from one year to the next. That's tough on the old books. If you look at the same event and you bring in damn near 8 figures less for it the next year.
Not to mention what Hogan's getting per pay-per-view.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously Drew thinks Hogan killed WCW.
Well, no, I mean,
someone in the chat said Hogan killed the WCW, and how he referenced it seems like Bret Hart because he always would refer to it as the WCW or the SummerSlam.
Or the SummerSlam, yeah. Corey, you brought up the whole finding out how WWF purchased WCW.
Yeah.
And I'm going to date myself here, but I remember my dad, we got the newspaper every day at my house. And I remember my dad coming downstairs with the newspaper and saying, hey, look, your guy just bought your other company that you watch. And I was like, what? That's how I found out. And then I read the article. And then, I mean, nobody had any idea Vince was showing up on WCW Nitro. I mean, maybe the people who worked in the company, but that's how people got their news. It was either on the internet if you had AOL, or it was, through the newspaper. So it was shocking to say the least. But the buy rates are one thing here. Kevin Nash made a really good point, and I think this is really part of what we're focused on tonight is, all those guys that sat out the last Nitro, Hogan, Hall, Nash, just to name a few, right?
Yeah.
Why would they show up? Goldberg? What are they going to show up for? Like, truthfully, are you going to put the world championship or the tag team titles on those boys? No, because you want to know what's going to happen. Vince and Shane and WWE at WWF at the time are not going to bring those guys in and have just because they have the championships on them. And it was smart. They knew that they weren't going over there. So, I mean, to me, when Nash said it, it was brilliant. It really was.
And to that point, I'm so happy that even with all those guys that didn't show up for that last Nitro, I'm happy as hell that they got Sting and Flair for one final match to send off WCW. You had them having the first one of the first matches on the first Nitro.
They main evented the first Nitro. Yep.
So you have the first and the last, and it's tied in probably the best rivalry in WCW. I'm glad they at least pulled that off.
And Blake, something that you mentioned earlier with the cost, it probably was more money as far as what they were losing between the 2 years, because at that point, if I'm not mistaken, I only know this because I think WrestleMania was $50 that year, and I think the pay-per-views were either 35 or 40. I don't even think they were 30 at that point. They might have been 35 or 40.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact numbers, but just doing rough math in my head, it's a difference in revenue in almost 8 figures, which is astronomical from 1 year to the next.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were $29.99 from what I remember, the WCW pay-per-views. And WrestleMania, I want to say 16 had an all-day package of $49.99, and the regular pay-per-view was like 35. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure 17 had the same damn thing. So
yeah. So yeah, it's to that point, it's you're seeing the money like dwindle. Like especially when you're looking back.
One thing to think about from a business aspect, sorry, Corey, is
go.
and Eric talked about that. He's talked about that in his books. He's talked about that, I don't know if they talked about it in that, but he's talked about it in other things. The way a lot of companies base their budgets for the following year is based off of what you made the previous year. So if they were expecting to bring in $10 million in March and they brought in 2, that's a big hurt to the books and the budget for the company that year.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, fellas, as the show continues, we're seeing Eric Bischoff kind of touch on, he's saying when he's brought back that at that point he could see WCW was pretty much dysfunctional, and it was getting to the point where it was becoming where he could see that people thought WCW wasn't fixed, but they thought it was broken. It was to where there was no way it was being fixed. At this point, also, Eric once again reiterates that he thinks the losses that WCW had were coming from being that losses from other departments were being allocated to WCW. That's the second time, at least, throughout this series that we've heard that. Do you really think that that's, and I'll start with you, Drew, do you really think that that is such a heavy contributing factor with the way Eric keeps bringing it up?
So I will say that I definitely believe that they tried to pass buck and pass blame, that being Time Warner passing a lot of their, entities that were losing money hand over fist into the WCW umbrella or pool, for lack of a better term. But I do believe that when the changing of the guard happened and Ted didn't have a voice, and when, a certain somebody came over, we can name him if we want. I believe his name is it Jamie Kelner? Is that right?
Yes.
Came over and totally ripped out the guts of professional wrestling on the Turner networks. I think you really saw what absolutely ultimately killed WCW. But yeah, I think that conspiracy theory is spot on. There was a lot of other things in this episode for me that I thought were kind of like, dude, pick a lane, but we'll get into that. But this, I think, has a lot of merit. I think they were dumping their losses onto the WCW books, because at that point, I mean, they were losing money hand over fist. So why not try and hide a little bit more in there?
And they considered WCW collateral damage. I think they
yeah,
said
at that point, it was like, all right, let's do whatever we can to get this horrible product off our network. And I think that's what they were doing.
Oh, no, exactly. So, and Blake, I'm going to go to you now. So the merger happens at this point, and they're pretty much trying to, what they're doing now at this point is, if I'm not mistaken, I think as Ted Turner, he becomes, I guess, with the Time Warner merger, he becomes, I guess, the executive, like vice chairman or something like that. But they allude to the fact that it pretty much is just his name that's the value in that.
Yeah, he gets an office and he has no power anymore.
No power at all. With that being said, this is when Eric starts to explore the option. He says in there, hey, what if we try to sell WCW for what it's worth now? And, Siegel's pretty much like, nobody's going to want it. Wrestling's not where it was. And so Eric then comes into the situation where he gets the partners with Fusent Media. Looking back at it, Blake, do you think Eric had a good lead at this point? Or do you think he's pretty much getting to where they're do you think he was, I guess, sold a false expectation? Or do you really believe that that company that he was with had that best intention to try to get WCW?
Yeah, if you look at the background of those guys and what they made, I think they're definitely the intention was there. I think, Eric talked about it. What Eric said, the dysfunction is what. So in the span of a couple of months, Brad told him no, Brad told him yes. Jamie Kelner comes in and basically wants to kill it. I mean, and like Drew said, I do think there is something to the fact that there was a plan. They were trying to actively get rid of this. And if you're going to get rid of this and you're going to write something off your books, yeah, you can dump other losses onto it to justify it to the board. And the Ted thing's a big component, because I liken it to now obviously there's been some other stuff that has come up recently that has taken him completely out of it, but it was a lot in the way of when Vince sold to TKO a couple years ago. Vince had that title, but in reality, Vince was a minority shareholder in the company at that point. Vince was not the one calling the shots anymore. And same thing with Ted. Ted had a great title. He had executive chair or whatever it was, but Ted was a minority shareholder. So if AOL people said, hey, this WCW shit sucks, Ted didn't have a leg to stand on.
It's a great point. Vince lost his 51%, and then Vince was shown the door, pretty much.
Yep.
So, and that's a great point, Blake. To piggyback on your point, Blake, and I'm going to ask this to you, Juice. At this point, so Blake's pretty much thinking, as he stated, yeah, Eric's pretty much got a good lead with these guys, and he's probably going to he is in the process of trying to get WCW. They talk about how he goes to Hard Rock Cafe, Hard Rock in Las Vegas, and pretty much scopes the scene out that, hey, this is going to be where we could possibly be filming our weekly television shows. How do you think that would have came off? Let's just say WCW goes to Eric Bischoff and Fusent Media. Do you think that Hard Rock concept would have worked for them at that time in 2001?
Absolutely. Here's the thing. I know that WWF New York and, the world had some success, and even WCW had the Nitro Grill, which had little to zero success. But where they did have success was when Eric Bischoff grabbed a hold of the company in 93 and 94 and said, hey, we got to get rid of house shows. We are losing money. And what they do, they went to Disney and they had tapings, and they ran off a bunch of tapings, and they had a fresh crowd every single week, every single show, no matter what. And it was unique, and they got a lot of stuff in. It didn't really cost them that much. At this point, whenever there's hemorrhaging money And first of all, the fact that we were just, last week we're talking about, or a couple weeks ago, we're talking about 1998 and how amazing everything was within a year. And it's like, how can we sell this thing is incredible that we got here. But if they get it to the Hard Rock and they do something similar to what they did with Disney, it's elevated. It's Nitro instead of just, Saturday night at Disney. 3,500 people, that's not that bad. And it's, hey, we talk about current product every now and again. AEW could benefit from something like that. You get a residency, they are going to do that. In Texas, you get somewhere that wants to house you, they're willing to pay. On a larger scale, we're seeing that with WWE in the recent Indiana deal. But you get someone to do that and house you. It's consistency. You know where you're going to be. And it'll hold. If it would have worked then, they could have held off from whatever until they got someone to purchase it and, elevated from there. But I absolutely think it would have worked. It's just frustrating that they couldn't have made that happen.
I agree 100% with you. I mean, Drew and I talk about this when it comes to AEW. Part of their issue right now, and it's not a lot of their own, it's not, but their own fault in a lot of ways. But when you run those big arenas like that, and WCW is going through it, you saw it in the quick little snippet they showed with Uncensored. From 99 to 2000, Juice mentioned it. The 99 crowd was rocking. The 2000 crowd, the building looked half empty. So what happens, you run those big arenas like that, and the building's half empty, the sound goes away. It sounds like they don't give a shit. And that's what some of the current products doing with it right now. Like, if you go into, from a TV perspective, from a viewership perspective, I don't give a shit if it's in Vegas every week. If it's loud and the crowd's into it,
right? Because the arena
enjoy it that much more.
The arena presented on TV is going to look how it looks for the TV viewer. Like, unless you're there live, you're not going to know that it's in Vegas, and it's in Vegas. But it's presented in a way that it's exciting, and the fans are there. And just like any other Las Vegas residency, you don't think that would, sell and people would be going in there to watch that, So I think it definitely could have had some success.
In some markets it works, in some it doesn't.
That's right.
And it's, the Dallas market, the Vegas market, the New York market might work for a little bit.
Yeah.
But, to Corey's question, the WCW reboot, The Big Bang, would have absolutely worked. I think Bischoff and his partners would have really put a good spin on WCW. I'm not, the beautiful thing about what was going to happen with that whole relaunch and that reboot was that all of those men were already under contract. So it's not like Eric and Fusion Media was inheriting, WCW, but it was only half of the roster. They had their availability was to everybody. So
it wasn't the invasion roster.
Right. So you mean to tell me you could have Hogan, Goldberg, Hall and Nash at the Hard Rock in 3,000 people? I mean, that'll put some asses in the seats for a couple weeks. And if they write good television and you can captivate an audience, you'll do well.
You say a couple of weeks, Drew, but I mean, if you look at Vegas in the entertainment industry, people do residencies for a year at a time, all the time. It could have worked for a lot longer than just a couple of weeks.
Wrestling's different though, Blake, because if
wrestling was also wrestling now is different because nobody outside, if you're not in WWE, nobody knows who the fuck you are. People like you just said, Hogan, Hall, Nash, Goldberg, even DDP, because of the Jay Leno thing, they were mainstream stars back then.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing, right? For me, I understand what you're saying. You're not wrong, but this demographic will go to that stuff. If we were flying to Vegas for a weekend with our buddies or we're there for a business trip, there's another demographic that want to go see Cirque du Soleil off some vitamins, or they want to hit up a pool party, or they want to do something. They want to go to a concert. I think concerts draw a lot better with the residencies there in Vegas. Wrestling would work. I just don't know for how long. And that's why I think Eric said it was a 3-month deal or something like that.
It would have been enough to try to get them back on their feet. And 2001 was a hot time.
Boring.
And if you had the top stars, I do agree with Blake. I think it could have lasted for a while until they got some sort of help, or sell it or something.
If you could get Hogan.
All I'll say is this.
They could have.
There's a reason every freaking sports league is trying to get a team in Vegas. It's because they know people will go to the events.
And Aaron could have got Hogan. Vince Russo wasn't a part of it
if you could get Hogan to, we're fantasy booking, but if you could have Hulk Hogan on every Nitro that was at the Hard Rock Blake's 100% right, and so is Juice. They would sell at least 3,000 tickets, at least, no doubt about it. But again, I think Eric had a really good idea, a really good plan, a really good infrastructure. You could tell Eric was rejuvenated, but then we saw what happened. So
yeah, and that's exactly what I'm about to get to. And this is I'll present this scenario, and this is for anybody on the floor. Just jump in. So we have Big Bang that's on the horizon, and Eric's being told, hey, by Turner, hey, you're gonna get your same time slots. You just need to provide your product. So he has his Monday show, he has his Thursday show. He needs to provide the product. And at this point, Eric's like, okay, I know what I need to do. I just need a little bit of time, need a little bit of a break. As far as he understands, which a lot of people thought, even going into that last Nitro, they're just going on hiatus. And then all of a sudden, rug's pulled out from underneath them, and Turner's not giving them a hiatus, not giving them their time slots. They're canceling. At this point, what do you all think? Like I say, anybody jump in. What do you all think is going through Bischoff's mind in particular at this point, where he is saying, he's thinking, I've got my TV time. I need to have the product. I'm getting a break, and I'm about to refresh brand new, and then boom, cancel.
Well, I'll jump in here quick. We can go down the line just so we have some. Bischoff was buying it, and correct me if I'm wrong. The numbers here, I might be off. Bischoff and Fusion Media, I think, had a $64 million deal on the table for WCW. 67. Okay.
67.
And that included television time on the Warner family networks there, TNT and TBS. And that was probably a very good evaluation. And WCW would have taken, or Time Warner would have taken that, Warner Media, in a minute. But the problem with all of this is that they did not want wrestling on Warner anymore. And then the evaluation of WCW went to shit because of that. So the theory here that we saw, which was the cahoots, the wrongdoing, that the theory of that the two executives worked together to pull the rug out from Eric, I think is completely ridiculous. I think Eric knew that once the television time was done and it wasn't going to be on Warner, it was going to be a real tough task to get people to tune into a different network with a new WCW. And Eric didn't even touch on the fact that he did not shop WCW to other networks, because I think he was smart enough to understand that if Warner didn't want them, who the hell else would? And it's really tough to take a product that's been there for 30 plus years, Juice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then be like, hey, we're going to be on the CW. Like it wouldn't have worked. So Eric was smart enough to be like, this deal's done.
Right. It would have worked if it were Monday Night Raw that's been successful for 30 years going to Netflix. Yeah. But whenever you have 99 and 2000 happen for WCW and you see where it's at, the only option is to try to go back with, who had you for so long. Not that many people, or you would have got maybe a lesser network. And I don't know if Eric would have wanted the, injustice of putting WCW on a quote lesser network.
Access Television.
That's right. Access Television.
He said it was worth $10.
Exactly. Well, I think they quoted it as 20.
Whatever. But
so I think Eric showed you what his mind. I think Eric was caught off guard more than maybe even the wrestlers himself, because I've heard the story Eric told in the episode tonight. I've heard him tell that 3 or 4 different times. He was all in until Brian Badal called him and told him the deal was done.
Yeah.
And even then he said, congrats. And Brian was like, no, dude, like it's over.
And they had the poster for the Big Bang. It wasn't like that's just some thing created for the show. That was a real thing. Bischoff was probably trying to get, some stars locked in, some booking ideas. Like he was probably very far along in the process before,
Eric would have totally rejuvenated WCW, and that whole thing would have been great. But again, to Blake's point, when Badal called and Eric thought the deal was done for him, and then the rug was pulled out from under him, and then he got into the nooks and crannies of the deal. Eric knew that deal to WWF was probably an oversell, truthfully.
Right. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, your point about the valuation going down, and when they're coming off of 1998, 10 million people watching wrestling combined, and like 6 million people a week watching Nitro 2001, where they were getting like 2 million. So their audience had dropped by 2/3. You can't go sell that. Because what are you selling it as? Yeah, well, I mean, we're at 2 million right now. We might take 6 months off, and we might can get you 1 million. Like, who's gonna buy it? You have to stay on Turner.
And to that point, Blake, spot on. So the rug is pulled out from Eric and Fusion Media, right? So they're sitting there and they're like, okay, the final Nitro is in 5 days from when I just received this phone call. How the hell am I going to get somebody else to give us television time in 5 days of notable status? It wasn't happening. So unfortunately,
and I also want to jump in on the conspiracy theory thing, because I think you're dead on, Drew. I don't buy that that Brad Siegel and Stu Snyder had this plot to kill WCW. What I do think happened was, once Jamie Kelner made the decision to cancel the TV time and say he didn't want it, Brad Siegel went to his friend, because he knew Vince was the only one that would buy the son of a bitch,
and said, "Hey, listen, we're not going to be able
something.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to do a $67 million deal because Eric's not going to take it because the television's off the table. What is the highest you'll give us? $4.7 million? All right, I think we can get that done, because realistically, Siegel and everybody else knew, Badal, they all knew that company, WCW, wasn't worth half its ass without the television time. It was aging stars and multi-million-dollar contracts that nobody wanted to inherit without television time.
And Siegel called his friend and said, "Hey, will you guys give us something so we don't take a total loss on this?"
And Kelner killed WCW.
100% he did.
And to Blake's point, whenever Kelner comes in, it's not that Siegel and them were in cahoots. Although I will agree with Bischoff to where too many coincidences happen for you to not think something. But of course, from Eric's perspective, how could you not think that everybody's going against you? But to me, like you guys have all said, once it got to a point of, we know how much this is worth, and they just wanted it off the books. Like, they were almost indifferent to who took it, what happened. Please just get this out of our hair. And they got what they wanted. And unfortunately, with the crazy, eerie timing of Jamie Kelner passing away a couple of days ago, really sheds a new light on all of this. And I know, and I'm not going to try to present a controversial theory about that, but I do know that he was potentially reached out to for this, and I don't think he was available. So maybe he was already having some sort of medical or health issue. But I think if he was already having some sort of issue like that, and this was and he maybe watched this show, it couldn't have been good to watch all of this stuff unfold again and see people, throw names around and just bury people.
Thoughts and prayers to the Kelner family for sure.
Absolutely.
I do want to say, I think you're correct, Drew. I think you could say Jamie Kelner is the one that pulled the plug on WCW. Brad Siegel might have put the son of a bitch on life support, though, because he made some bad decisions.
And that's what Kevin Nash said.
Yeah.
He thinks it was Siegel.
I don't think either of them wanted a WCW from the jump. And then when Ted was kind of removed from power, I mean, if you have to draw, the conspiracy theories could go wherever they want to go. But I think Eric's too close to this. And Eric is
100% he is.
A very smart, educated, businessman, and he's on the Mount Rushmore of wrestling, like for executives and personalities.
Well, I said it.
No doubt about it. There's no argument there, but Eric is too close to this to really understand, in my opinion, from an outsider looking in, and that's all I am, that when Ted was removed from power, there's your first red flag. The cahoots happened to get rid of WCW off 100%. Of Warner. And then when they're presented with the $67 million deal, it's like, well, we got to take this. And then they go to Kelner, and Kelner's like, all right, this is a great deal. Yeah, but here's the caveat here, Jamie. We have to keep WCW on our networks. And he's like, nope, get this shit out of here. I'm looking to restart and reboot this network, and I don't want it on there. And that's what happened. There's no like, hey, we got to push Eric out of here. That just didn't happen.
No. The thing that killed it was canceling the TV. I mean, that was it.
Yes.
They had a chance. Who's to say they would have been around 25 years later now or anything like that? but they were going to be around for at least a little while longer if they did not kill the TV.
And what's wild as we, progress through this whole thing is how successful it was. I cannot help but think, because I mean, Drew, we've all made these points, the booking decisions that turned the product into a loss at a certain point where they couldn't get good footing, to where if they had decent programming throughout 99, I don't think they would have said, oh, we're losing all this money. Had they not lost as much as they did, they'd have felt maybe there is some equity here. And again, not that it would have saved everything. Yeah. I think it could have held it on, like Blake said, life support for a little longer to where someone else could have got it.
You know, my dad used to use this expression all the time in business, and he's like, a snowball will continue to grow if you roll it downhill. And this is exactly what happened. In 1998, we want to talk about who killed WCW. Hulk Hogan pushed the snowball down the hill for not wanting to let Goldberg ascend to the heights that he wanted to ascend to, and it's hot as the product was. And there were
get the fuck out of here.
There were other. It's 100% accurate. And then there's other things that happened.
So
with
in
WCW.
6 months, he goes from putting him over to win the title to holding him down.
100%. Look at we got.
Well,
two,
they didn't have. They
we got
didn't
two
know
historians on here.
They didn't know what to do with Goldberg after he won the title. He had like 3 title defenses outside of a Road Wild Battle Royal against the entire NWO. Bad creative. And then once they take the title from him, he never gets another title shot. And Hogan is the guy that gets back in.
And here's
it's hard to not say that.
There's 2 historians on here. Goldberg gets the title at the Georgia Dome in 1998 against Hogan. 6 months, what was it, a year later? He drops the championship. 6 months later, he drops the championship to Nash, and that's okay. The fans were still heavily invested. Goldberg is removed from that. Hogan is awarded the title from the finger poke of doom, and they run a program with Hogan and Flair for like 6 months.
Yeah, like why couldn't Goldberg be a part of that when he was on the shows and he was selling?
Because it's not going to work for me, brother. It's not going to work for me.
So it's hard for me to look at that.
Get Scott Hall fired. That's why.
Well, he wanted Horace Hogan in that big Warrior Hogan rematch at Havoc 98.
Hogan saw Goldberg all over mainstream media and was like, "That's my spot, brother. That's my spot, brother."
It's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, Juice, Goldberg never wins the world title again from that point, and Hogan gets it, 3 more times, I think, after
Hogan gets it a couple more times. Flair gets it a few more times. Vince Russo got the title. David Arquette won the world title.
Yeah, look at all the guys that won the championship besides Bill Goldberg.
And Goldberg,
I remember at Nitro where I think they had a title change every hour.
And all that Goldberg did,
that did happen.
It did happen.
Yeah, I know it did.
That's a real thing.
They reran this. Yeah.
They had a match in the first hour, a match in the second hour, a match in the third hour.
What was it? Sting beat DDP beat Sting for the title at the beginning of the show?
Was like,
Sting beat DDP, something like that.
I think it was DDP and Sting flip-flopped it. Like DDP had it to start the show.
By the end of the night,
Yeah. Well, I mean, when Arquette wins your world championship, it doesn't matter. You could devalue that sucker all you want.
Well, and the other part, they ran back the streak with Goldberg at the end of his run. They were like, we have nothing else. Let's do a streak where if you lose, as he's tagging with Dwayne Bruce, Buddy Lee Parker, the guy that trained him, big draw, let me tell you. Yeah. And like that's what they ran. They had not. How do you go from him ascending to nothing? To Drew's point.
Yeah, but
it's not going to work for me, brother.
They were just trying to throw whatever they can on the wall to make it stick. I mean, they ran the NWO out there with Hall and Nash and Bret Hart and Jeff Jarrett.
Hulk Hogan's contract, the investigation of Eric Bischoff, the embezzlement of Eric Bischoff. These are 2 major factors.
The hiring of Vince Russo. Go ahead and say that.
No, I really don't think Vince. I don't think Vince is higher.
It's not as higher percentage as people think. Watching this, there's so many other people. I'm like, you know what? They had a fault.
I think that was a Hail Mary. Yeah, I think that was a Hail Mary, and I just think that they bought a bad bill of goods. That's what it was. They bought a lemon, and Vince Russo.
At least we got Bash the Beach 2000.
11. Right.
Yeah. No.
I think Vince Russo. I think Vince Russo thought it was, well, if I'm gonna do this wrestling shit, I'm gonna go down there and make more money.
Duh.
And it was just, I think that was doomed from the start. I mean, WCW was dead by the point that Russo got there in September of '99 already.
If we circle back to that final Nitro,
Sure.
And Corey, I want to ask you this because you've been asking all the questions. I'm going to ask you this. Sure. If you look at the talent that wasn't on that final Nitro, Goldberg, Hogan, Hall, Nash, Bret Hart. I mean, you look at those 5 names right there. And basically what they're seeing is, okay, and I know Bret was hurt or whatever, but you're seeing this and you're looking at that from their perspective, and Nash touched on it. And he's like, why would I show up to the Titanic? I'll watch this shit from home and
Such
get
a great
paid.
line.
Which is brilliant because all he saw was, okay, Vince owns this now, and Vince is going to do what Vince wants to do, and it's going to be a WWF show, basically. And Booker said it was an audition. I don't really think it was an audition, truthfully, because I think WWF was going to take Booker T and some others because they were not the multi-million-dollar contracts that were 50 cents on the dollar. Booker had a nice contract, but
you got to look at me too. You got to look. I'll get to you, Blake. You can have it after just real quick. You got to look at it from Booker T's perspective. He was a guy, as I mentioned last week, who really grew through the ranks of WCW and had a tough ass time doing anything until Vince Russo got there and had the big fallout with Hogan. So why would Booker T think that, oh, I'll just be a huge deal in WWE? He had to do an audition.
No, I'm not saying that Booker T. Listen, if somebody called and was like, hey, Booker, we're putting the world championship on you in the final Nitro and Vince is buying the company. If you're in Booker T's shoes, you 100% do it. If the roles were reversed and they called up Kevin Nash and they were like, hey, Kevin, we're going to put the world championship on you and you're going to have to come to the final Nitro, and they're going to dangle that carrot, and they're going to say, well, Kevin Nash is the final world champion of WCW. They knew in the back of their heads, like, you guys got to play this game a little bit better. They knew they couldn't call Goldberg, Hall, or Nash, or even Hogan and say, we need you at the final Nitro, and we're going to put the world championship on you, because they were never going to pay those contracts.
Okay,
no, but they also knew
they also
knew they would get those guys eventually.
Where I do think Booker had an audition Monday night. That Monday night was an audition to see what he was. Because if Booker doesn't have a great match with Scott Steiner and show that could be a tough, he ain't going in and working with Steve right off the bat. And now he didn't end up working with Steve because he broke his hip or whatever when he threw him on the table at King of the Ring. But remember, that's Booker's first appearance in WWE, is jumping the rail and getting physical with Steve Austin. If they think Booker's just a jabroni, he ain't showing up to. I don't give a shit if he's the WCW World Champion or not.
Yeah, it wasn't that he was.
Think Booker's a star, he ain't going to work with Steve immediately.
It wasn't that Booker was a jabroni. And Corey, you've been waiting patiently, so I'm gonna after I say this, I'm gonna jump over to you. It wasn't that Booker was a jabroni. Booker was affordable, and he was durable, and he was a damn good wrestler that they could afford to pay if Booker was willing to take the 50 cents on the dollar. There's a reason that Scott Steiner.
I agree with all of that, but my point to you is, if they did not think Booker was a star, they do not put him with Steve right out of the gate. Steve was their guy in 98 or in 2001 still. Steve was still the guy.
All those years. Yeah.
I'm going to let Corey talk. We'll circle back to that because there's a reason they did that, but we'll go to Corey.
He was in the booking meeting.
I'm not about that it's always right, but I mean, they had a lot to gain by putting their the WCW world champion that they were trying to.
How?
We'll get into it. We'll get into it. Corey, the lack of star power on that final Nitro. I mean, we get Sting and Flair. Great. But the lack of
you'd rather talk about Kidman being on Nitro than Booker T.
I love Booker T, but I'm saying the lack of star power.
Jimmy Wang Yang.
The lack of star power on that final Nitro was alarming, was it not?
Yeah, so I want to touch on something that Blake said. To Blake's point, I think with Booker T, I think it has to be understood that he kind of has his back against the wall in the sense that if he, kind of takes the quote-unquote Hollywood route and just waits out, he doesn't have that luxury of the name value that everybody else does. He has to. He's almost at a point that he has to take the 50 cents on the dollar to even continue his career, because if Booker T is not made out to be a star and being made world champion on that last Nitro, they could still bring Booker T in. Sure, there'll never be a mention of him being WCW champion. He'll just be a guy. And I'm not saying that as a disrespect to Booker T, but considering where he had to climb from to be where he was at that point of the final Nitro, I think he's and that's why I kind of do agree with the thing that he says it was an audition, because
100% it was.
Yeah. If if WWF isn't sold on him, among other things, but definitely that match also, he's not brought in to work with Steve Austin at that point. I don't think he is.
No,
I think
he's working with Taka Michinoku.
He had to prove that he was a top guy from not just WCW's eyes, but in the eyes of everybody. And then to Blake's point, he works with Steve Austin.
He was the most affordable star.
Affordable with WWE, they could have bought anybody.
You're acting like
that's what I'm going to get to next.
That's not true at all.
Like he was on the same level of Hogan, Hall, and Nash.
Listen to me.
Just because he was the WCW champion, we're talking about a time where Jeff Jarrett was the fucking champion 18 times. David Arquette, the WCW championship meant jack shit at that point.
No shit. We're talking about contracts.
Booker wasn't a star.
Right, but we're talking about contracts. You're not going Hogan, Hall, Nash, Goldberg, and Bret Hart.
Nobody's arguing with you about the contracts.
I know, but you're missing.
You're right. You're missing. I want you to listen to me.
No, you're missing the point.
Let Blake have the floor. I want to hear this.
This is what you want. You're right about the contracts. You are correct. Where you're wrong is saying that that was not an audition for Booker, because Booker still had to prove himself, even though he was going over there.
Let me ask you a question.
If they didn't think Booker could work with Steve, he's not going over there in that capacity. He's going over there to do what like Mike Awesome and Lance Storm and all those other jabronis did.
No doubt about it, but let me ask you a question. Okay. Who on that roster that was affordable to WWF at the time? Because, Juice said they could buy anybody. They weren't doing that. You can't bring over a Hogan, Hall, or Nash that are making $7 million and then look Steve Austin in the face and say, hey, I understand you're making this all match it, blah, blah, blah. What I'm asking you is who on that WCW roster at that point in time was affordable to hold the World Heavyweight Championship? Who?
Nobody. But the point I'm trying to make to you is, if they don't think Booker's that caliber of a star, he's not going over to work with Steve. He's going over to do some mid-card shit.
Even if he was WCW champion, it
wasn't about Booker being affordable. They thought Booker could hang with Steve.
Yeah, I think that you may get to a point where you're bringing a Booker over and he's working with, and not even knocking, he's working with the King of the Ring Edge at that point. He's not working with.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah,
Booker made them feel like he could come over here and be a star. He's not just affordable. That's why they put him in the ring with Steve from the jump. If they didn't think Booker could be a top guy in WWE, like I said, he'd have came in fighting Taka Michinoku and
Maybe Scott Steiner didn't come in until 2002, and he was in that final match.
Because Scott was making a boatload of money.
But he was on that Nitro. All those other guys was making that money. Yeah, and all those other guys.
Why didn't Scott come over though?
Because he's a psycho.
Because they didn't see anything worthwhile, and then you saw they brought him in, and it didn't work with Triple H. They saw Booker T as worthwhile because he auditioned on the final Nitro.
Guys, what did they do after King of the Ring? Where did they head? Maybe this will throw the light bulbs off.
To the stupid invasion that sucks.
Thank you. Stop right there. The invasion angle. So how do you heat up the invasion angle? You bury your fucking champion, Booker T? No. So you put your...
how do you heat up the invasion angle? You flip Steve Austin.
Just look at all the other guys that were with Booker. Booker T was the only
you're bringing in the WCW World Champion for an invasion angle.
You try to bring in ECW. You try to flip Steve Austin. That's all the shit they tried to do to heat that stupid ass angle up.
You guys sat back and were like, oh, they brought in Booker and they trusted Booker. Sure, no one's arguing that, but they viewed Booker as a top guy. Bullshit. They brought Booker in to lead the WCW invasion angle. The only way to heat up this angle was for the WCW champion to take out the WWF champion at the time. Because otherwise it makes no sense.
You're telling me that WWE, and even though his name's Mud now, Vince at the time, if he doesn't think that Booker can get that angle over with Steve, that they're not going to do
Drew,
it anyway?
How about this, Drew?
No fucking choice. There was nobody else.
That's what I'm doing, Jackwad.
Yeah, you don't. I was just going to say, Drew, if it's not Booker T, there's no one else that they're going to think that can do it. And Booker
T, proving my point over and over and over again.
Bring Booker over as GI Bro and just don't do anything.
Oh God!
Now we're talking.
That was where I was going to go. Is that okay? And I was going to ask this: if you get to the point where they don't trust Booker and they don't see that, okay, Booker can hang. Does the invasion angle ever even happen?
With Booker immediately because he hurt Steve.
Because think about that. I know, but even so, if Booker doesn't have the match that he has with Steiner and reinforces that okay, this is our guy we can bring over. That's what I'm saying. Does the invasion angle ever even happen?
Well, they had their.
I think it's possible that it doesn't. If they don't think there's a guy that can, and it's not just because he was cheap, Drew. It's because they thought he could carry it.
So they had
and not just he was the only guy either.
What are you talking about? The only two guys that came over were Booker T and DDP, worth half their ass in WCW, and those two guys. Okay, all due respect to Shane. Right, all right. Meet Sean Stasiak. But anyways, they took the two top guys that they had brought,
but he's dead.
or could get from WCW, DDP, and they threw him into an angle with The Undertaker. And then they threw Booker T into an angle with Steve Austin.
Terrible.
Are you guys seeing the fucking pattern here? They took the entities that they could get and could afford and put them against their two top talents. And then they did the invasion angle, and they had to blend ECW into it because the WCW guys were like, fuck you, I'm not coming over.
I just don't think that Booker, to assume that, do you think that Booker T and DDP were the only two guys that they trusted to do that with the top guys? Or do you think Booker T needed to earn that by proving in an audition that he was worthy of being the top guy, not just because he had the belt?
The point I think we're trying to make is you act like Vince is still going to run that angle with Mike Sanders going against Steve Austin or
above average.
Good for you.
Yeah, above average Mike Sanders or
Chris Canyon.
Canyon.
Canyon's a great worker.
That's the point we're trying to make is, yes, you're correct. Booker was affordable. But they also thought Booker could do it. If they didn't think Booker could do it, they aren't doing it. They're not putting Mike Sanders and Chris Canyon against Steve.
And to Booker's point, he felt he needed to prove himself. Well, it's not that bad to say that he needed to prove himself or to feel like he was hungry enough to do it. Just because
I'm not
he was
arguing
affordable.
that. What I am going to tell you is, do the both of you really think that Shane and Vince didn't have Booker locked down before that Nitro hit the air?
What do you mean locked down? Like contract?
Yeah.
Or creative? Do you think Booker knew?
Do you
I'm sure Booker was locked in contract, but I'm sure that
you think that
Booker T wanted to go, I want to do the best I can in the last match literally on WCW. Okay, it's not no shit because you're disagreeing that it wasn't an audition.
But again, I'm going to stand on my point. If Booker says it in that episode, he had a year left on his deal. He had to take a buyout with Time Warner.
He could have sat out like Nash.
If Booker says, no, I'm not taking a buyout, Mike Sanders isn't showing up at King of the Ring and dropping Steve on a table.
You're 100% right. That's not my argument. My argument here is that, no, it's not. My argument here is that if Scott Steiner or Sting said to Shane and Vince before that Nitro hit, hey, I'm in. Hold on.
I think Booker, I love Booker. Booker's great. But I'm sorry, if you're going to offer me free money, I'm sitting at home and taking that shit.
We know. What I'm saying is that if you have Scott Steiner and Sting, let's just say those two, for lack of a better term, saying, hey, okay, forget the guaranteed dough. I will come over to WWF. I will do this. Yes, before that final Nitro. They're going to put the championship probably on Sting, and they're going to have Sting drop Steve Austin at King of the Ring. No disrespect to Booker, but Booker was the right guy at the affordable price who could absolutely work his balls off.
So it still was an audition.
Why? That's the thing. We all
right.
Yes, I'm just gonna say
I'm
that.
Not saying you're wrong. I never said you were wrong.
Yeah, but you're saying it's not. You're saying it's not an audition. Booker felt like he needed an audition. Yes. You could say he was locked.
You want to know what? You're right. All right. Here, you guys are right. You know what the audition was? Hey, I need you to take 50 cents on the dollar of your WCW contract to come over here. You're going to do it? Okay, you're in. You're our guy. Come on over here. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's why above average.
He was so cheap that he ended up having such a great career because he didn't prove himself. They just he was cheap, so that's what he was. King Booker, and he was cheap. He was.
That's not what I'm saying. No one is diminishing.
That's what you're saying. Hey, Booker T. Drew thinks the only reason you were good in WWE is because you were cheap.
That's not what I said.
There's a headline.
It's not what I said at all.
That is funny.
Not what I said at all.
Gentlemen, this has been great. First of all, everybody listening and tuning in, we
Things
really
got hot
appreciate
in the episode this week.
It really spirited.
Over 500. Thank you very much. Over 500.
Yeah, spirited debate is an understatement.
Blake is going through it right now.
I want to take you all. I want to run through some final things, and I've got a final question for you all. Booker, he finds out he's going to win the championship, and he's happy about it, and he realizes that because he says in there he now has a chip, and he has leverage now to get into WWF. So at this point, he's saying, he has his match. He's going over as the world and the U.S. champion. WC, and we talked about it earlier, how WCW was bought for practically pennies on a dollar, and everybody has their theories as to how that happens. And it's funny, Rock's little inserts in here are always so funny in this documentary, because it's like, we know you weren't over there, and we know he was a part of the era that was a part of with WCW dying, but it's like he talked about how he had this list of people he wanted to work with.
I thought that was complete total bullshit.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, because I was like,
I can't picture Rock going, yeah, Vince, I want to work with Sting. I want to work with Scott Steiner. I want to work with Goldberg. I want to work with
Mike Sanders.
Why do you think
Mike Sanders and Chris?
Well, why do you think that's so irrational?
I just don't think I've never taken Rock as that guy and be like, yeah, I want to do. Rock's like, oh yeah, that'll make money. All right, let's do that.
But all the guys he named were money makers.
What is he, Cody Rhodes, making a list of people he wants to work with before he? I mean, come on.
So
it just seems like revisionist, so people look at him in a better light. I think that's what Blake was saying.
It just seemed contrived to me.
Okay, okay.
To that point, which much like what I wanted to kind of piggyback on something that Drew was saying earlier, bringing those guys in, your Hogan, Hall, Nash, Sting, Goldberg, all those people that kind of had those high contracts. The thing I thought of that probably would have been an issue bringing them in was not necessarily the money, but the position. Where were you going to put those guys where Steve Austin was still at the top? At that time, Benoit, Jericho, Triple H, Kane, Undertaker. You had your top guys in WWF already. Yeah, you may have had matches with these people when you brought them over, but what were you going to do after you had the matches? Because at that point, you've got a Sting. You've got to, and we saw what Flair eventually did. Goldberg eventually went to that top when he came over. Nash was eventually in a top spot when he came with the people they were working with. But Triple H was still the top guy. Even Booker, when he came over, he worked initially in the alliance, in the invasion angle.
Oh,
but
Booker
then
did bad stuff for a while.
Yeah, and that's what I was alluding to. Then from there, at that point, he's doing the match at WrestleMania against Edge over shampoo. So,
listen, Nash talks about it in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason those guys stayed and took that money, is because they knew, I'm going from being on top over here to, they're going to be, Nash was going to be featured. He was featured when he came in, but he's going to be enhancement talent.
It's not going to be 90. It's not going to be Diesel in 95. It's a whole new.
No, but he told you quick.
It's clouded up there.
He told you quick, Blake. After WrestleMania 18, and they were only there for what, 2 months. He was like, "This shit's done. We're cooked."
Yeah.
But I'm going to take the G.
They brought in to kill. That NWO. Vince brought it in. The angle was he's going to kill the WWE, but in reality, Vince brought the NWO to kill the NWO.
100%. I'm going to take the GM approach here, Corey, because you asked the question, right? So I'm going to take the GM approach. The problem with the WCW contracts and even bringing them over, let's just say Vince offered them exactly what they were getting paid on their WCW contracts. That creates a giant problem in the locker room and a divide, because you're looking at your books and 5 guys come over that haven't even wrestled a match in WWF at that time in over 5 years, because I'm going to give Hogan, Hall, Nash, because they were there in 96 and 94 and whatever. Then they become the top earners in your company. That doesn't work. It doesn't work when you're beating the shit out of them and beating them in the ratings and the creative sucks and everything else like that. They could never. So those guys were never coming over, and they were smart to wait out their contracts. Like Blake said, why not? Because realistically, all Vince wanted to do was plant his WWF flag and say, we were better than you and look at us. And they did that. But the biggest thing that I took from this as well is that all of those guys and girls eventually went over to WWF for the most part, besides Sting, who eventually went way down the road. Because after their years and years and years off television, the only thing that they needed and wanted and desired was to get their names back out. So Vince McMahon won that battle too, because we'll freeze your ass at home, collect your money, and then we're going to offer you less money to come back. That's what they did.
Well, and one thing to think about when it comes to some of those guys like Steiner, Hall, even Steiner. I mean, Steiner was on the up and come as a main event singles guy at that time, but he'd been in the business a really long time. Hogan, Hall, Nash, a lot of those WCW guys, they were on the tail end of their career. Booker was not. Booker had that. DDP was different because DDP just wanted the experience, even though he was old as shit at the time. But Booker he'd been in the business a long time, but Booker was still, ascending in the prime of his career. The Hogan Halls, like, there's no motivation. Booker had the motivation to go to WWE, and he started in a top position, but then like when he's doing shit with Gold Dust and stuff like that, and he had to work his way back up. Booker had the motivation to do that. Hogan, Hall, and Nash didn't have that. If they weren't coming in a feature spot, they weren't coming in, period.
Smart.
Yeah, and Nash had a little program with Triple H. Hall had that brief interaction and was out by Mania 18. Hogan, of course, back to this point, had the longevity and lasted until 06, 07, and it was featured on screen well into the 2010s. So not that many people would have had a chance. There was a lot of top talent.
Goldberg would have had a chance if he didn't have a piss poor attitude back then. If the 2014 Goldberg showed up in 2004, Goldberg would have had a long run in WWE.
The biggest thing with the names you just mentioned was Hogan was pushed out by Vince. The other two were pushed out by Vince McMahon only because he couldn't afford them. So he held a grudge, I believe, with Hall and Nash, in my opinion.
I think Goldberg would have been a big star and had a long run if he would have came in with the same attitude he had in 2014.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, once again, this has been an amazing show. This was an amazing series to be recapping these 4 weeks. It's been a pleasure with you all. The question at hand, with everything we've seen over these last 4 weeks, I'm going to start off, but here's the question for you all.
Good. I'm glad you're starting. Look, about time you took a question.
Yeah, for sure. It's the question. It's the show that we watched. Who killed WCW? I'm going to answer this. You can give me two names, reasons, two things that killed WCW. Here you go. For me, one was the executives that did not want WCW. If you don't have the support, you're not going to have a show. And to piggyback on that, no television, that's the other thing. It goes back to the old adage, the old saying, tree falls in the forest and nobody's around. Does it make a sound? I don't think WCW makes any noise without a television product. They can have all the tapings they want. They can have all the spoilers out there of, this happened. Because, people were going to put the word out there. They can have all the shows that they want. But if it's word of mouth, that only is going to last them but so long. And the television, without any eyes on it, that person, they have those shows in Las Vegas, that person sitting in Green Bay, Wisconsin, that used to be a fan, that isn't getting that information in 2001, they don't even know WCW exists. So for me, the executives that didn't want it and them not having a television product, that's what killed WCW to me. Drew?
To give it two things would be tough, but I'll 100% agree with you, Corey, and thank you for hosting, and thank you all for watching this. This was a fun series to cover on Vice. I'd like to thank the guys and girls over at Vice TV and $7 Productions. Two things, I would say 100% the executives. I think when they brought in, the guy from Fox whose name's escaping me right now, I think that was that the guy
Kelner.
No, Kelner. Jamie Kelner.
Yes.
I think
Kelner,
that killed WCW in terms of them not having the affordability and even the want or desire from the Warner executives to have professional wrestling on the Warner family networks. I think that killed WCW. And I will say this until the day I die. There are two other entities here that contributed to the death of WCW, and they are Hulk Hogan's contract and the investigation of Eric Bischoff for me.
So the real answer is death by 1,000 cuts. There's a lot of things that caused the death of WCW, but to try to pinpoint two, I will say Bret Hart and Vince Russo. No, I think it's mismanagement, not by necessarily Turner executives, yes, but I think Eric at times and other people at times. I think it's mismanagement from the word go, and then ultimately, I think Jamie Kelner is really who killed WCW because he's the one that made the decision to take it off of Turner Networks.
Totally understandable. Appreciate that, Blake. Juice, Mr. WCW himself, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. And like you guys have all said, this has been a wonderful series to watch and cover with you guys. Appreciate everybody watching and listening. I think I agree with mostly what all of you said. And it's very tough to really decipher who truly killed WCW. But I'll kind of go and play off all three of you with my answer. I think absolutely the executives at Turner, that WCW was always the redheaded stepchild of the network. And even when it got successful, it was like, yeah, well, so whatever. It was Eric Bischoff's, big claim to fame there. And the other half, I would say, is the creative, the booking. I don't think the executives would have pulled the plug so easily or wanted to get rid of it so easily had WCW kept making money hand over fist in 98, 99, 2000. If the success was there, there would have been some sort of incentive to keep it around as a money-making venture. And to all of that, it's, Eric Bischoff is a part of all of this. He had to do something to turn WCW around once he threw his name into the ring, quite literally, and he got, up a higher position. How do we get Hulk Hogan in here? Got to do something with creative and creative control. What were some of the problems that we've mentioned all these weeks? Some of the creative, with Hulk Hogan being at some of it, but other people as well. When all those things come together, no money is being made and a lot of money is being lost. Jim Ross said it best: cash or creative. And when there's no good creative, you're not going to make any cash. The last few years of WCW were a coffin on roller skates. And unfortunately, we're all just discussing it now. So appreciate you guys all discussing this with me and having me on. It's been wonderful.
I'm surprised nobody touched on the fact that when Ted Turner was removed from power, because that really, and he wasn't removed, but realistically he was removed. The merger also killed WCW.
I mean, to me, that factors in mismanagement. I mean, like I said, the real answer is, the honest answer is death by 1,000 cuts. Like I said,
a lot of different things. You
can name 20 different things that really
contributed.
Caused the death of WCW, in all honesty. Bret Hart's one of them.
Yeah, literally, from creative to talent to management to resources, finances.
What's your beef with Bret Hart and WCW?
Whoa.
I just know you're a big Bret Hart guy, so I just like throwing Bret under the bus.
No, Drew's just a fan of the most overrated match in WrestleMania history.
I do think that, I will say this in all honesty, I think Bret was done before the way he exited WWE. Bret was done at that point, so I think Bret didn't give two shits the entire time he was in WCW. But
true, but they didn't really hand him great creative.
No, but to Blake's point,
him being the Hogan's understudy was awesome.
Right. To Blake's point, again, Bischoff hands the pencil to Nash, big mistake. But then they cut the guts out of Eric Bischoff and they investigate him for embezzlement, and they tell him that. The same thing with Bret. Bret gets screwed in Montreal by Vince McMahon. They cut his guts and his heart out, and then he went over to WCW, and Bret never wanted to be there. Never.
No. I mean,
he wanted to be a WWE guy for life if he wanted it.
Yeah. I mean, if we all watched Wrestling with Shadows, I mean, Brett left because Vince told him to leave.
Yeah, come back. You can come back. You make a lot of money. And I think Brett would have been back in 2001. But anyways, Corey, thank you so much for hosting. These 4 episodes were great.
Killed WCW.
And right. Anything you'd like to add? I mean, what did you take from this? I mean, this documentary, this 4-part series was very, very pro Eric Bischoff, in my opinion. And it painted Eric in a very nice light. But I think Eric has assumed responsibility, which we saw towards at the end. But what did you capture from this?
Yeah, so being able to relive it again, and there's so many things over the last 20 plus years that have come out, from books to other presentations of media that show, okay, this is what happened in the last days of WCW. But this focus that they did on this 4-part series, in the era that we are in wrestling, to be able to revisit that with the resource, because all of these other times, for the most part, you couldn't go back and check out some of the things they were mentioning. You have the WWE Network now, for the most part. Most people have it, or some way to get to on YouTube or something, that you have the cross-reference. And that's what I thought was so important with watching, Who Killed WCW. We've been covering the last 4 weeks. You can go back, and we talked about it offline amongst the 4 of us. Hey, we can go back and watch Starrcade 98. You can go back and watch Starrcade 97. You can watch the Nitro where Bret Hart debuted. You can see the Finger Poke of Doom on it. You can cross-reference and have a better understanding of everything that was mentioned, because the information is out there now, as opposed to even 15 years ago. Yeah, 15 years ago, there was no WWE Network. There was no way, unless you had old VHSs, which I do. But unless you had old VHSs to go back and watch. Yeah. But look, we'll have to get into that on another show. Look, so we unless you have that information to go back then when this stuff was coming out, the wealth of resources that we have now to look and cross-reference things, I think was amazing, and it was a true addition to what we watched, and I thought it was well done.
Yeah, and you know what? I thought it was what you just said was very, very well said. And I'll say this because a lot of people hear about the Finger Poke of Doom and they never go back and watch it. And if you really, what you guys and girls should do, obviously, when you're done watching these review shows, I urge you to go back and watch, if you have the time, a little bit of what was discussed on here and on the 4 episodes of Who Killed WCW. Because if you go back and watch the Finger Poke of Doom, it is a really good episode of Nitro.
Yeah,
it's just what they did next week was complete and utter shit. And then the week after that was shit. And the week after that was shit. So that's what killed WCW.
And announcing Mick Foley was going to win the championship. And then 600,000 people changed the channel.
Hey, Steve Austin's going to help Mick Foley win the championship. But don't change that dial. Wait a second. I'm going to go check out what happens over there. How does Mick Foley win the title? Yeah, which is really, really stupid decisions. Blake, you're laughing. Go ahead, dude.
Can you hear the background noise?
No.
Okay. Why I'm laughing is my dog is literally running laps in the living room. I'm trying to stay on camera.
All right, Blake. So why don't you tell everyone they can like, subscribe, and not follow you so you can get out of here?
I did want to say the one thing that you said, what's the takeaway? To me, I will say one of the takeaways from this is, even though I have issues with it and I don't enjoy some of what they do, I'm glad AEW is independently financed and not ran by a corporation or a media conglomerate, because they might already be out of business if they were. Because they have had some certain things happen that you could possibly conceive as mismanagement issues. Simple. But that I'm thankful for that, because that AEW, will be in business as long as Tony Khan wants to be in business and will finance it, as opposed to if it was ran by Turner, just like WCW, maybe Turner already pulled the plug on it because they put too much money into it. So that is a big takeaway for me, is I'm glad that there is another wrestling entity that is independently financed like WWE was back in the day.
I think it's going to be funny when Warner Media hands over a bunch of money to AEW after they got out of the wrestling business for so long.
Well, yeah.
All right.
Content business is a lot bigger than it was in 1997 to 2001.
And ratings only matter to advertisers, just so you guys and girls know. Just saying.
Wow.
Man, it matters to the internet.
It's still real to them, damn it. The ratings wars. The ratings war. Juice in the juice box. Where can we like, subscribe, and follow you, buddy?
Hey, don't follow me. Yeah, I was supposed to do that. Yeah, don't follow me.
And don't follow Blake.
And don't follow Blake, although he's a great follow. His last name is very easy to remember. But appreciate everybody watching this and getting to discuss this with you guys has been fantastic. Especially you brought me on as the WCW specialist, and it's been great to hear Corey's perspective and seeing that he went at Starrcade a few years. So I am also glad that there is an alternative to WWE that, even though it's on Turner Networks, it is independently financed. And had Eric Bischoff had the same type of reigns that Tony Khan has, WCW might still be around. And so I've had fun. The Juice Box every Friday, wherever you listen to podcasts. I talk a lot of WCW in regards to anything I can parlay it with the current product. So find me there.
I think Eric Bischoff wishes that he was Tony Khan in today's wrestling landscape.
Oh, yeah.
Just me.
Oh,
maybe.
Just saying.
Not if you ask him that.
Right. Well,
he wishes he had Tony Khan's money. I don't know if he wishes he was Tony Khan.
Same thing.
Couldn't have said it better.
Not the same at all.
No.
Corey Saunders, my kicks or my fix. What do you got going on? Where can we like, subscribe, and follow you?
Like you just said, I am at my kicks or my fix on X, on IG. I talk wrestling belts, which I collect. I talk tennis shoes, which I collect. Getting my last little sleeps in, as you know, Drew, because I'm about to be jet setting via car. Going to SmackDown on Friday, going to Forbidden Door on Sunday. Then I'm driving up to Toronto for Money in the Bank and doing SmackDown, Money in the Bank, and NXT Heat Wave. So I've got some miles I'm getting ready to put on, but I'm ready for it.
Oh yeah. I will see you all at Forbidden Door. I'll definitely see Corey at Forbidden Door. I'm looking forward to that. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow Final Bell Media. The AEW coverage will not stop at Forbidden Door. Before we get there, myself and Blake Mitchmore are going to cover AEW Dynamite live from Buffalo, New York tomorrow night. We are.
Oh,
surprise.
That's news to Blake.
So we will be covering AEW Dynamite. If Blake can't make it, Blake can't make it. I will be covering AEW Dynamite tomorrow. We appreciate all the love and support. There's over 1,000 people in here right now. I'd like to thank Sean Araz Sapp. I saw he showed some love and support here on the show, so thank you very much, Sean. Listen, I'm Andrew Baydala. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow to the stuff that we do. That's Blake Mitchmore. That's Juice Robinson. That's Corey Saunders. Again, hit the notification.
Juice Robinson?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. That's right. That's Juice Springsteen. I had to do that. I had to do that once. You
stole my gimmick.
I had to do that once before we don't see Juice for a little bit here. I had to do it. He is at Juicy Scene. That is at Blake Mitchmore. That is at my kicks or my fix, Corey Saunders.
Don't follow me.
We are Final Bell Media. Make sure you hit that notification so that when we go live, you will know. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and follow button. We'll be back tomorrow night. Juice has got his Newport hat on. Love it. It's his trademark. Thank you very much.
For AEW fans to tell me how much my opinions suck tomorrow night.
That's good. That's everything, right? That's absolutely everything. We appreciate it, Corey. Thank you for hosting.
Last week. We'll see if I can flip them again.
It's the art of the swerve, right? It's the art of the swerve. All right, guys, girls, thank you very much. Enjoy the early morning here on Wednesday morning. Go Birds, I guess.
Birds.
Go Jets. Greed.